This is a presentation of SBE 15, New York City.
I would like to thank and welcome Chad Davis from Nebraska Public Media, who is kind enough to be joining us tonight. Chad, the floor is all yours.
Thanks for having me to do this presentation. I will tell you, I first built this deck in March, but have updated it quite a bit, and including some fairly substantial updates, literally while we're talking about business just now. I was cutting and I was like, these slides don't feel like they flow together. Right? So anyway, this will be exciting because there is new content that I put in over the weekend, and I just reordered all of it. So we're going to have some fun together while I occasionally have a deer in the headlights look and go, what's that? So who am I? So I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Nebraska Public Media. Some of you may have encountered over the years Ling Ling's son, who is our Chief Technology Officer. I know she is someone who has some repute in the broadcast world. So I work with Ling Ling, if you know Ling Ling. I've been in public media for 25 years or so now. And I've been in Nebraska about 7.5. Worked at 5 stations. I've worked at every license type, even a school district license type. So I've got them all under my belt at this point, FCC licenses, that is. And I got my start in television. So in the beginning, I was a TV programmer. I started off with kind of an entry-level job at New Jersey Network, back when it was New Jersey Network in the 90s. And I've been working my way around public media for the last, like I said, 25 years. And so my career has gone from television to digital to experimental. And I run a little group on the side also that is called Public Media Labs, and I can tell you more about that in the Q&A if you want to know. So a little bit about Nebraska Public Media Labs. The department that I run is an R&D unit within Nebraska Public Media. We focus on sort of next-gen public media. And the big theme for us is audience agency, which is, of course, interactivity and accessibility. And that's, I think, one of the biggest themes of my career. And we all seem like we're roughly kind of in the same age range, but it's, going from 3 channels to on-demand content, whatever you want, however you want it, whatever you want. Within our department, our focus has been on content and emerging media tools. A lot of what my team does now, 3D modeling for games. We've done a lot with 360 video in terms of sound design, working with DAWs and middleware to get things, good sound design into game engines. And of course, generative AI. One of the nice things about my position is I can pivot a lot. And in the process of pivoting, I can, jump on the new trends in generative AI. Been down that path. Thanks, whoever muted Andy. So if there's one theme that kind of defines our work in my department now, it's lifelong play. And a lot of that has to do with 3D interactive experiences. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about hype with AI, how to get here. We're going to talk about generative AI and what that is specifically in relation to the overall world of AI. Because, I mean, I'm talking to engineers. Y'all have been dealing with AI and AI-infused products for a long time, but this new generative AI, it's something different, and so we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about how we've been using these tools in Nebraska. I'm going to talk a little bit about the future, and then we'll do some Q&A. So this presentation is really a review of where we're at here in late 2023 with generative AI. I'm going to go into an overview of the capabilities and limitations, what the potential is and why we should also be concerned. And I'm going to do a preview of potential uses for all media, but obviously my bailiwick is public media. So you'll see public media mentioned. Again, this deck is kind of targeted for more of the public media audience. What this presentation is not is a technical deep dive. We're not going to get into prompt engineering tutorials, things like that. But at the same time, it's not a Valentine to AI. Like, I think these are tools. I think there's really good uses for these tools. But as y'all know, any tool can be used for good or it can be used for ill. So understand that up front. So let's talk a little bit about hype. We have gone through multiple hype cycles with AI. I'm actually in the process of reading a book, or revisiting a book actually, by Jeff Hawkins, who is the one of the people behind the original Palm Pilot, if anybody had one of those. And the book's called On Intelligence, and it was written in 2002. And it's basically about artificial intelligence and where he thinks 20 years ago this industry is going. And it's fascinating to read through a perspective at a time where there was hype about AI, but where we didn't even have iPhones at that point. So that's one wave back in the late 90s, early aughts. A lot of that was sparked by Deep Blue winning at chess. There's a lot that went in behind the scenes to make that happen. It wasn't just like, boom, computer decides it can play chess and beats, Kasparov. But it seems like a lot of these waves tend to have to do with computers beating humans at games. Along the way, we've developed self-driving cars. 2012 is probably the last big wave that we had. I'm a devotee of South by Southwest. I've been going for well over a decade now, and I was around in Austin in 2012, and that to me was like, that's what everyone was talking about. The singularity's coming. You have all these futurists predicting when AI is going to hit, and then it kind of just went away. We had Alexa. We had kind of crude implementations where there was some sort of algorithm playing against a database in the back end. Obviously, social media has leaned into the use of algorithms. China has gotten into the game since then. And again, we've had a variety of computers spinning a variety of humans and a variety of games. But this time it's feeling a little unique. And I think it has to do with the interface and the interesting discussions that are having about sentience. So I think one thing to keep in mind is that the hype around AI is kind of geared towards this discussion about whether AI is going to be a more perfect human or not. I think this is, again, the beginning of a new wave. There will be a crash. This is not this is how it's always going to be. We're going to go through another AI winter. But right now we're really at the peak of the hype cycle. And a lot of fear is being expressed right now. And I think a lot of those fears stem from the hype that AI is going to be a more perfect human. And in that regard, the idea, I think the big fear is that AI is going to replace us. We've seen that in work. We've seen automation impacting workers for centuries now. Blue collar before, but the thing that's different this time is that there's an actual serious discussion about white collar workers and creative workers. I can remember 10 years ago at South by, people talking about, AI is great. It's definitely the future, but it's never going to make a movie. It's never going to create content. We're seeing that now. We're seeing the beginnings of how those tools can start to work together in a combinatorial way and actually generate content. We still need a human, and I hope we always will, but for good enough content, 10 years from now, I don't know. I think you could see good enough content being generated by algorithms. There's a fear that AI is going to also step in and take over sort of the human-to-human component, like love, projected emotions, long-distance relationships, things like that. Anybody who's ever been in a long-distance relationship, I think, knows how much of that relationship's in your own mind. It's amazing if you stop to think about it, how our interactions with people really are just interactions with ourselves and our own minds. And I think that's the foundation for what makes some of the generative AI tools believable. It's why in January you were having these people freaking out and religions were beginning to maybe form around it. And you had the New York Times article, about the guy who, Kevin Roose, I think it was, who was ChatGPT was telling him to leave his wife, all that stuff. But there are people out there who are actually turning to AI bots for companionship because it gives them what they need in their own minds. So that's something that has been driving quite a bit of fear. there's that kind of overarching fear that AI is going to take away our free will. And then eventually life itself, that's where the whole Terminators, Cylons, HAL 9000, all that stuff. But there's a flip side of this. So if hype is about telling us AI is a more perfect human, we can be afraid of it, or we can also feel hope through it. And I think a lot of what I've been hearing from colleagues in media is about this notion of salvation through scalability, that AI is going to allow us to do all of these things that we never were able to do before. And certainly that is what the people who are building these products are pushing. AI can make you faster, it can make you more accurate. It's kind of true. Actually, the things that creative work that took longer in the past takes shorter now. I created an AI policy, and we'll get to that in a minute, for my station. I probably invested no more than 20 hours in it. And we've got guiding principles. It's a 3-page document, but I started with using a chatbot. Got heavily refined after that. There's a lot of human input in there, but it saved me a lot of white screen angst and a lot of head scratching and trying to figure out how to even begin. The thought that we would have greater prosperity through AI because AI could help create exponential wealth. Immortality, AI could help in disease because of its pattern seeing capabilities. There's lots of discussions about, is AI better at detecting cancer? We're not going to really get into that part of the AI discussion in this talk, but it's out there and it's cause for hope. NVIDIA is training AI to try and model the global climate systems, all of them, in real time. It's a big moonshot for them, but could AI solve the climate crisis? Cause for hope. And again, AI freeing us from loneliness. The people who are going to chatbots for companionship are desperately lonely. And who are we to say this is a bad thing necessarily if it gets them to a place of ease? So hope is part of this equation too. But remember that hype isn't fabrication, it's caricature. There is something beneath the surface of all of this. And that's, people can be very dismissive of hype and they, it's like cliches in a way. Cliches are true for a reason. And hype has something below the surface. So this is AI's iPhone moment. That's not my line. That is Jensen Huang's line from NVIDIA. But why now? So I think that we've got connections and infrastructure that are coming together. Certainly, I don't need to tell broadcast engineers about that, so I'm not going to delve too deeply into that one. The breakthroughs in compute power, the GPUs, I'm sure you're all also quite familiar with that. But also in natural language understanding and generation. We've been training these models for a very long time. If you used Google's phone service back in the late aughts, that was the earliest stages of training a system to understand human voice. And we've seen the products that come out of that along the way, and this is just the next level of those. I think there's also a social component here as well. AI's use in everyday life, whether it's Alexa, sorry if I triggered your device, whether it's, Siri on your iPhone, Google's Android assistant. We've had a decade of conditioning that has been getting us ready to interface with the current versions of AI, generative AI. In that respect, user experience is also coming of age. We are all programmers now because the user experience allows us to program with our voice or with our fingers, voice through our fingers. We're all programmers. And that's something that's new. It takes away that friction barrier. And then this is a new point that I just added actually over the weekend. I think it's an extension of this sort of first-person industrial complex that has really defined the last decade with social media and, everybody expressing their voice about their thing. I remember when blogs came about, and that was the promise of a brand new age, and the internet was going to allow us all to express our individuality. We're 20 years on now, and we're seeing what that's like. So I think that's part of it too. And I think that is making us receptive to the use of these tools. So if we have hopes and we have fears that stem from artificial intelligence, a lot of that comes out of artificial general intelligence. AGI is how it's often abbreviated. That's the stuff that Ray Kurzweil talks about. That's the stuff that, are we dealing with sentience and the destruction of humanity? All of those are issues that are worth talking about, but that's big. And what this talk is about is a little more about narrow AI, and specifically generative AI. So I want to make a distinction here between generative AI tools and AI-infused products. Something we're talking about in Nebraska is more automated captioning, and one of the tools that Ling is reviewing has an AI base to it. So to me, that is not the type of AI that I'm talking about in this presentation. We have seen AI infusion in products, again, Siri, Google's tools, Echo devices from Amazon. None of that's really new. It's these interfaces that are designed for active engagement. It's usually a chat interface. And this notion of having this iterative discussion with a database using natural language, that's the thing that's different this time. The AI-infused products that I'm referring to, that I think we are all familiar with from the engineering standpoint, because we've seen them infused in our products that we've contracted for or bought, that's designed for passive engagement. It's something that's it's infrastructure. It happens behind the scenes, and often it's set up as an automated process. So let me talk a little bit about what the limitations are with generative AI. And if you've played with any of these tools for a little bit of time, you've probably run up against some of this. Kevin Kelly, who founded Wired and has written quite a few books about technology over the years, talked about this at South by Southwest in March as, alien brains, that they don't have common sense reasoning. I think there's an evolution of thought that's happening about whether we refer to them as aliens or not, but that's definitely something that was kicking around earlier this year. There's also a limit to their contextual awareness. You have to give them context to make them generate effective content to meet your needs. And in the process of doing that, you have to have a coder's precision. I am not a coder. I can do a little bit, but it's not how I was trained. I'm definitely more kind of on the art side of things. And for me, that's been one of the big challenges, is the squishiness of language and having to figure out how to precisely tell these bots what it is I'd like to see from them. And the young people, because I work with a lot of students that are people just out of school, the ones who can jump between the precision and the art, those are the ones that are really going to have like the superpowers in the next 10 to 15 years. Bias. You can't talk about generative AI if we don't talk about bias, and I've basically boiled this down to Tech Bros automated. It's a problem. A lot of these models are trained on the internet, and the internet has been largely generated by white men between their 30s and 50s over the last 20 to 30 years. And you are starting to see that reflected in the responses that these bots will give you. And that is ChatGPT, that is Midjourney if you're doing art. We did an interesting experiment because we're working on a project with the Menominee tribe in Wisconsin. And early on, we're like, well, let's just see if Midjourney can generate concept art. Its understanding of Native American culture is basically rooted around the Plains Indians. And even if you ask it for something that is specifically tied to the Menominee tribe, which is a tribe that is a woodlands tribe from kind of upper Wisconsin, it's still cranking out teepees, headdresses, nothing that gets anywhere near the level of cultural specificity that we require for that type of content. Because there's a lot of bias, because the information that train these models doesn't include that degree of nuance. We'll get there. There are those who are working to get there, but it is definitely an issue. And then there's also the danger of peak data. You probably have read stories recently about AI being trained on AI-generated content, and how, like, within 5 cycles it freaks out and kind of loses its mind. I think the phrase is it goes mad, and I cannot off the top of my head remember what MAD stands for. But if you're there on your computer, you can Google it, MAD in AI. It's an acronym for it losing its place in reality, essentially. What that points to is that we don't necessarily have enough data out there to effectively train these models at the rate that they are consuming data. We think about peak oil, we think about peak water if we're really thinking about the planet. But there's also danger here with peak data. And that gets quickly into international relations because a country like China, who is developing a whole set of tools that are completely separate from the ones we're using, they've got a lot of data. They just don't have first mover advantage in terms of generating algorithms, but that is fixable. And so that's something to keep in mind with all of this, that, there's going to be different suites of AI tools, and they may not all have the right data to train them effectively the way we need them to be trained to use. So other limitations, we don't sometimes know how this stuff generates what it generates. Even the people at OpenAI who made ChatGPT, it surprises them, which is a little weird and a little concerning, and definitely was driving a lot of the fear earlier this year because the thought was, well, maybe we have artificial general intelligence and it's just hiding from us and we don't know it yet because we can't explain why it's suddenly so good at doing all of these things. Interestingly, it's gotten worse as the year has gone on. And this may have something to do with the peak data problem. Ethical dilemmas. Are these tools aligned with human values or are they aligned with corporate values? And which would we rather have? I'll leave that to you to think about. Privacy. I don't think surveillance capitalism is at all a new concept, but it gets put on steroids when you think about how AI could process data looking for patterns targeting people. That's a worry and a limitation. And then something that I dwell on a bit because of my Nebraska base is connectivity infrastructure. I saw a stat earlier today that there's still 6% of the US that is not does not have access to high-speed internet. And the cost of getting them access, I think, is like $53,000 an individual or something like that, at least if the article I read was true. Connectivity is going to be a problem. If we are expecting AI to be a huge economic driver for this particular next phase of our economic life as a country, we need to not be leaving people behind. And that's already starting to happen. And then another limitation is, again, specificity. These chatbots, the generative art, they're all just tools, but they're not toolboxes. And people think, oh, this is going to be able to do everything for me. And no, they can do one thing pretty well, but you got to know how to use it. And I always say over and over again in presentations and whatnot, know your tools. So let's talk about the tools. Here's a quick tour. Chatbots. I think everybody understands ChatGPT. I'm going to assume everybody does. There's the free version, which is based on the GPT 3.5 large language model. And then there's ChatGPT Plus, which is really GPT-4, which is a large multimodal model. And that means it can take more than just language as an input. You can feed it pictures and whatnot. But it's not the only one. There's Google Bard, which I frankly am not impressed with. They run off the Lambda model. Google's also training a Gemini model that it's talked about. Everybody's trying to unseat GPT-4 at this point. So you've got Claude, which is running on two things. It's running on this RLCAI 52B model, but it also has 16 principles that form a constitution, which govern its responses. So it's one of the first instances of what they're calling a constitutional AI. When I started doing my policy experiment and building a policy, ChatGPT, boom, 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 gave me what I needed. I went over, because I like to compare the bots, went over to Claude, and it flat out refused to generate a policy. It told me, I am a chatbot. I do not have the ability to generate policies for human organizations. Now, it had no problem reviewing ChatGPT's draft of a policy and telling me what it thought was wrong with it. But it wouldn't actually just start from a prompt and generate, same prompt as I gave to ChatGPT, by the way. It would not take that prompt and generate a policy because it's got a constitution that is putting some guardrails on what it will crank out. And then there are open source bots. Facebook a couple of weeks ago, or Meta, sorry, still can't get used to that. Meta dropped the Llama model, Llama 2, I think it is. They're up to now. And they just released it into the wild for free. It is arguably close to being as powerful as GPT-4, which is a proprietary model. So if you remember the opened and closed arguments that would happen between Google and Apple back in the aughts, everything just comes back around again. We're starting to have the same dynamics play out. They're going to be open source models. They're going to be walled gardens. Each is going to have its place in the ecosystem. The Falcon model, interestingly enough, is a model that I believe has been generated by the United Arab Emirates. The Middle East is making its own play here, which is going to be distinct from Europe, which is going to be distinct from China, which is going to be distinct from America. But Falcon is their model that they're putting out there, and the reports are it is also getting close to being as powerful as GPT-4. Once you get past chatbots, it gets a little more esoteric for people. Artists have been using a variety of generative art tools for still images. Midjourney is the one my team mostly uses. It is probably going to be available in wider release in the next year or so, possibly even the end of this year. But right now, the only way you can get to it is if you are a part of Discord, which just about every young person I know is. So since most of my artists are young people and they're all on Discord, we are using Midjourney quite a bit for concept art. I'll get into that in a bit. Stable Diffusion is another that has been fairly popular, as well as DALL-E, or DALL-E 2 is the second model's out now. That's from the ChatGPT folks. Interestingly, though, a lot of discussion has been happening about how these models are trained on copyrighted images. So enter Adobe. Adobe has a tool called Firefly. You may have heard of it. Adobe trained Firefly on images that were all copyright permitted. I think basically all of us who use Adobe who didn't know we had been opted into using our images supplied the training data to use or to develop Firefly. But Adobe's coming out and saying, hey, we'll indemnify you. This database is clean, and others are taking that tact as well. They're saying, like, maybe we can't quite create the Midjourney look, but we can give you something that you can take to your boss and feel okay about. And that's good enough at this phase. I'm often reminded of that old ad, and I'll get it wrong, but nobody got fired for buying IBM, if I'm remembering that right. I think we're in the same boat with some of these new tools. And then there's Google Imagine. Honestly, I put this in March, and I haven't heard anything about it since, and I may end up taking it out after this version. So let's talk a little bit about voice. The big dog in this particular junkyard is 11 Labs. We've played a little bit with Narrakeet. We would like to get into a situation where we start doing more voice synthesis. We have an interactive experience called Expedition Nebraska. The producer has a great voice, and he did all the voice work. But one of the problems that we have internally is about getting booth time. We in the interactive side are always in competition for those type of broadcast resources. But we've got a ton of audio that's already been professionally recorded of him. So we really want to get to a point where he can actually update his scripts, create new content using his own voice from his desktop or his home computer. So the big thing here about this slide is just to know that voice is coming. I'm sure you all have thought about deep fakes, heard about deep fakes. That voice is a serious component of that as well, but there are going to be some sort of pro-social uses for it in the not too distant future as well. Getting even more esoteric, generative AI video. Runway is, again, the big dog here. Make a video from Meta, Stable Diffusion, Synthesia, Deep Brain. Again, they're out there. They're products that one could try, but the one that's getting all the buzz right now is really Runway and Generation 2 of Runway. And there's an interesting sort of content niche that's developing where people create promos for movies that don't exist using generative AI video tools like Runway, using 11 Labs for the voice, using generative music tools that are coming out. So if you haven't checked out some of those, they're not hard to find. But it's an interesting it's going to go away soon, but it's an interesting way that the power of these tools is being demonstrated. So you get a hint at movies that could eventually be made, but all they're basically creating is trailers. So it's kind of a fascinating media. 3D models. Roblox has a proprietary system, and they are getting into type in your prompt and we'll generate, a car for you or a Frisbee or whatnot. This is definitely out there. Just know it's coming. And the people who say, well, they'll just never be able to do that. NVIDIA is really putting a lot of investment into this, and their Magic 3D tool is on the list here. Just know that, 3D modeling is coming. And that's also, although this talk is not about the metaverse, that's going to be a huge jump forward in terms of developing out the next gen internet or the metaverse. So we're going to take a brief detour here and talk a little bit about policy. This has been occupying a lot of my brain power over the last month or so, because we've gotten to a point in Nebraska where we really do need to start putting some guardrails around this. So what I've created, again, with the help of chatbots and my team and our leadership team at the station, is a framework for experimentation with generative AI. We're not calling it a policy right now. I think this world is moving way too fast to call it a policy, but we're working with this framework with the idea of it's a living document and it's getting us to a policy probably sometime next year. Speaking just off the cuff, what I'll say is basically when AI kind of goes through its crash phase, that's probably about the point where we're going to lock in and start having actual policies on stuff. And so part of the promise of all of this, part of the reason we want to have this framework at the station is we want to encourage people to use these tools, and that is from the GM on down. I have been super psyched because sometimes we adopt things quick there, sometimes we don't, but there's been so much experimentation across a lot of different departments at the station with generative AI. And we're in favor of it from a senior management vantage point because it brings us cost savings. It brings us better ROIs on the investments that we've already made in human resources. And we've been very clear up front with our staff, hey, we're not looking to replace people. This lets us do more public media with the same investment of resources. And we are conservative in our investment of resources. And so this just lets you make more content, make more of what it is you do to serve the overall mission. These tools can help us with operational efficiency. They accelerate tedious tasks, though I will tell you, and you'll see this come up later, they create a whole new level of tedium. The tedium doesn't go away. Getting a chatbot to do what you want can be a tedious task. And also it helps with sort of optimizing resources, and that you get into more of the automation stuff at that point. Where I come into play with a lot of these tools is in terms of enhanced creativity, ideation, brainstorming, first drafts, concept art, concept review. These tools are really good for that. We want to use these tools to enhance our service. We want to maintain high ethical standards. And the big thing is audience trust. So this framework is geared around those big principles. The guiding principles behind us, and I'm realizing that in the background, when I cut and paste it, there's a whole bunch of I messed up the slides, basically what happened. But if you squint real hard, you can see guiding principles in the background. And the guiding principles here are people first, people last. Human oversight, human feedback, that's key to making all of this work. Transparency and accountability, truth and authenticity, bias mitigation, we talked about bias earlier, continuing education, collaboration and shared learning, and accessibility and inclusivity. These guiding principles are basically what helped us kind of put the framework together. I see there are things coming up in the chat. Jeff, Conrad, if you guys want to shout some things out, don't feel bad about interrupting me. You can kind of see what we're thinking about with these, but in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of click through this, and I can make the framework as it stands now available. But if the chat has questions, just shout them out.
Yeah, we'll open it whenever you're ready to take some questions. Somebody just wanted to know if this deck would be available, and we record all of our presentations and post later. So, whenever you're ready for questions, just let us know.
Cool. Got a few more slides, but I'll move through them quick. The guardrails for experimentation here in Nebraska: augmenting creation, reinforcing transparency when we use these tools, and making sure that we are cognizant that these tools are biased and we do everything we can to mitigate the bias. Augmenting creation comes to human oversight, or comes with human oversight. That is essential. Ideating, drafting, refining. We've talked a little bit about that, and not using these tools for research. They are not designed for that. We've all heard about chatbots hallucinating. I've done my own tests. Don't use them for research. Reinforcing transparency. There's a distinction we are making between editorial and corporate content, and informing production teams when you're using these tools. if we use it for editorial content, informing audiences. That's something that we are making a commitment to do. And then in terms of evaluating bias, there you see at the bottom, know your tools. If you use these tools, we're saying you have to do rigorous fact checking and you have to treat them as unvetted source material. That's really for the folks who kind of fall into the journalism crowd. The ghosty headline at the top still says guardrails for experimentation. What this slide has to do with is IT principles. And again, I know if you're in engineering, good IT basic practices are core. So you're going to see a lot of stuff that looks familiar to you. Free is never free. Don't download stuff to your local machine. Don't share your passwords. All this stuff I'm going to jump through because I believe this group, if anybody, gets that. Another thing we have to take into account at Nebraska, license holder policies, staff feedback. That's important to us growing this policy, and a quarterly policy review. We will be updating this at least quarterly. So let's get back to the tools. How are we using them in Nebraska? They're good for data analysis. You can see insights in big data sets. To pull back in the medical aspect of things, that's what's happening when these tools are looking at X-ray images for cancer. They're just looking at structured data and finding patterns that they can match. We use it for brainstorming, blue sky ideas and narrative inspirations, and then also voice. One of the experiments we did was we actually created a column for our members magazine written by our chief strategy officer. And I did that by feeding in 10 of her columns and saying, okay, here's your topic, ChatGPT. I want you to imitate the last 10 columns. And I don't think she did any editing. They just published it as is. It was good enough that the editors were publishing it with full disclosure. Other ways it can be used in linear content production, which gets more to the broadcast side, summaries of sources and transcripts. PBS, their Skunkworks team, has done some interesting experiments where they actually feed in time-coded text, and then ask the bot to pull out specific types of quotes, and that can be very useful for doing promos. Converting speech to text in multiple languages. Another way that we've been experimenting with using it, and then natural sounding narrations or dialogue. That's another thing we've been talking about. Writing, talked about this enough. I'll skip that. Education, using these bots for creating quizzes, study materials or learning objects. Again, fact checking is super important here, but there's definitely some time savings that can be generated. Content descriptions, press releases, social media for the marketing side of things. Other things we're doing, proofreading, summaries of research. If it's a long article, I've gotten to the point where I'll drop things into Claude because it takes more text and ask it to just give me a summary real fast. So I'm getting some context before I dive into a long read. And I find that's been really helpful for me internalizing information as I'm reading it. I use ChatGPT when I can't do my own, or when I don't have a proofreader to come in. It's a helpful proofreader. And we talked about ideation and brainstorming. Coding, if you're dealing at all with coders, we've been using it a little bit to broaden out our own ability within my department, because I've got half a team that's software developers. They've been using it for rubber duck debugging, and also to sort of just, again, branch out from their sort of object-oriented programming languages. Voice synthesis I've talked about, concept art I've talked about, fundraising or fundraisers, and this is not something that gets into the commercial world so much, but generating scripts for pledge drives, copywriting, and again, we've had some real luck with transcript synthesis. It also, frankly, gives creatives a new way to look at problems that they've been trying to solve for a while. Some of our producers who do the pledge stuff, they've been working with the same messaging for a long time, and being able to just feed in to a chatbot a set of parameters about describing a particular value add and saying, what do you think is good about this? It generates new avenues of thinking for them, and it gives them some fresh perspective that allows them to freshen up their own content. Future experiments, keep an eye on Microsoft Copilot. I've wondered if that's going to be table stakes in 2024, but I'm going to be honest with you, I wondered that until they announced the price tag that goes along with it. Now I'm not so sure. Adobe Firefly I've already talked about, and some of this other stuff we intend to be experimenting more with as a station as we get to the end of this year and the start of next year. So, okay, where are we going with all of this? Big finish. the improvements that we have seen in natural language understanding and generation, that's not going away. That's going to get progressively more, well, I say improvements, but there's going to be progressive enhancements. I do think it's going to be steps forward and back because of peak data. I think increased collaboration between AI and human creators, like I said before, it's going to create new types of tedium. But I think that's going to create even lower barriers to entry for creation and for also enabling diverse voices. And with that, you get into the metaverse and the commodification of content as well. Where it could be headed, the death of distributors. Can AI in 10 years be just serving you the content you want when you want it? Possibly. Data sets and libraries that are aligned with pro-social values and missions. Could we begin to see a distinction between the different types of generative AI that's out there and that people use? We get to constitutional AIs like Claude when we talk about things like this. And then for the public media folks, just upskilling diverse creators and civic engagement. A lot of what we've done over the years within public media is train folks to use media. Media education, and this now becomes a part of that. This becomes part of the media literacy curriculum that we will be focused on within public media. What worries me today, who's writing these rules? You've got China's take on things, you've got America's take on things. And I wrote this in March, and it's still true: regulatory indecision. People are talking about doing something, but nothing's really happening yet. And then thinking about digital colonialism in the global South. And I have a whole bit that I do that I will skip over right now, unless someone really wants to hear it, about how these bots are trained. And it relies on people who speak pretty fantastic English in countries that don't have high per capita incomes. So that's something to be aware of. I'm also concerned about domestic inequality and social upheaval. I think that these tools, as they develop, it's going to be like putting PCs on desks in the 80s and 90s. So for my generation, this is kind of going to be what the boomers went through and the silent generation in the 80s. I'm worried about a digital 1%, that the digital divide gets to a point where the haves and have-nots, people get left too far behind, and what that's going to do to society. I'm worried about deepfakes. I'm worried about media literacy as well. And I already talked about peak data. All right. So what can we do as a system in general? Be focused on how you handle your data. This is for us as a PBS system, but I think it applies to media at large. Transparency about AI, addressing those biases when you are aware of them, being respectful of copyright, and making sure that it's people first and people last. And what I also tell my colleagues, stay on top of this stuff. This is less of an issue now than it was in the spring, but try to create a culture of experimentation within your organization. Collaborate with other organizations. Frankly, this is big, and not many of us can do it alone. We need partnerships. Develop your own ethical guidelines and best practices. That's where our framework comes in. And keep staff on the right side of the digital divide. That's the biggest thing. So I'm Chad Davis, and I'm with Nebraska Public Media, and I thank you for your time.
Yeah, that was great. It is a big tamale of a topic. So I want to open the floor for some questions, but I have a quick one in here. So I noticed you weren't too impressed with Google's attempt at AI at this point. What do you think about Bing's?
Ooh, can you stop the recording? Bing. I really wanted to buy the hype on Bing when it first came out. When they infused GPT-4 into that, I was like, oh, this could be really interesting. And I think it will get there. I suspect Google will eventually lap them because they just have so much of their own first mover advantage when it comes to search. I don't use Bing. I played around with it for a month or so. And when I need something at this point from a chatbot, I go to ChatGPT. I have a ChatGPT Plus account, and I use GPT-4 model for that sort of thing. I like that they allowed you to tune Bing so that you can say, I want you to be creative and make things up, or I want you to be just like super focused on the data you can pull from websites. I think that's a helpful distinction to make, to divide it into threes like that. But it's not a tool that I've gone back to. I am someone who still seeks out the authoritative source on something. So I'm still Googling for information. But what's interesting is that people who are like half my age, they aren't. They're looking at TikTok. They're looking for influencers to tell them authoritatively how to feel or think about something. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's just a generational thing. So my usage is not one that I just don't feel comfortable with Bing's creativity, but a younger audience may find that acceptable if they come to believe in Bing as an authoritative source on stuff.
Great, thanks. Okay, open the floor. Who's got a question? Unmute yourself and be heard.
I'll start. Does your OpenAI elevated account protect your data, or is it ingesting that along everything you're putting in there? Is it feeding the model?
Mine is, because I've made the conscious decision not to opt out of the ingesting. I figure I'm a human and I'm media literate, and I can tune what I put in there. I do not put in personal data. I don't ask it things about myself or ask it to draft things about myself. One of the things about these chatbots that I find, because I'm a writer, not novels and stuff, but I love language and I write, and I've been writing since I was young. No matter how much I feed it, it can't capture my voice. It can't capture my voice the way I hear my voice in my head. And it can't capture the nuances of my voice the way it changes from day to day with my mood and with my topic and with my audience, the different identities that I put on. So I don't really use ChatGPT to draft things that need to come into my voice. I think it's amazing for drafting policies, for drafting things that need to be in a corporate voice, but it's not something that I use for my own stuff. So I don't put my own information in there. I'm very careful about putting in station information. I redact all of that. I just, put it out. Case in point, I'm trying to generate an MOU for a project, but I took out all of the, names from the templates that I wanted to feed it as part of the prompt and just put party one and party two. And so I'm careful about what I put in there because I'm making a conscious choice to say that I want to feed it data. You can turn that off now. That's a recent advent.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. That gives you the ability to not scrape the data.
Yeah. But the flip side of that is ChatGPT has also rolled out a tool that will allow you to create a set of permanent instructions or semi-permanent instructions so that it gets to know you better and that it gets to create more responses that, basically you don't have to go through all of the tedium of getting ChatGPT to give you exactly what you want and write prompts the exact way. You just have to give it a set of instructions up front. That's more data than I want to give it. So, they are still working to try and capture user data in different ways. They're just trying to offer you solutions to pain points in exchange for that data.
Expanding on the data privacy thing and the copyright, I'm wondering if you've done anything to prevent the OpenAI stuff from scraping data off of your corporate sites.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, at the beginning of August, OpenAI rolled out an announcement that said, hey, if you don't want us to scrape your site, here's how you can basically block that in a robots.txt file or something like that. So no, we haven't. And part of the reason we haven't is we're public media. And in this, I'm kind of guiding the organization. We've had a little bit of a discussion about it, but my feeling is public media is created in the public interest and it's public. It's already out there. And so the issue of it being copyrighted is it's not, I my own personal feeling is it's not as undercutting for a public media organization as it is for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. So where we're coming down right now is not keeping this stuff restricted. We also don't put much of our content behind a firewall. There's a very select few pledge shows that have a small window where they're exclusive, but most everything else is just offered. So that's very much coming from a public media philosophy. If your job is to make money off of content, you should be looking at this, because we ran a little bit of a test just to see about, okay, OpenAI is talking about this. How often is this bot hitting our site? And the way it ramped up over the month of August was pretty surprising. It went from being like, when I first asked our web team, like, hey, are you seeing this? Like, it went from being like our 41st most, the 41st bot or whatever. It was number 41 in the list of all the bots in terms of traffic. Not saying that clearly, but by the time I wanted to publish some information on this, maybe 2 weeks later, it was 6. It had climbed the chart that fast, and that's how many times the OpenAI bot had hit our site in just 2 weeks. Will it beat out Google's bot? Probably not. That there was I think it was like a 6 time in Google was like 300,000 and hits in the measurement window, and OpenAI was something like 50,000 hits. But if it'll be second at some point soon, if it's not already.
Yeah, thanks for answering the questions. Appreciate it.
William's got what it looks like.
Yep. Rather than taking our data, will it be possible for us to have our personal AI that works for us and provides identity protection and remediation, and we can trust it?
I believe, and this is just a belief, I believe that product will be launched at some point. Someone's going to roll that out. It's going to cost probably quite a bit of money. It's definitely going to be something that the digital 1% have. Right now, if you are a skilled developer, you can actually code this based on the open source models that are already out there. So for those who have the ability, I believe they can build their own kind of personal chatbot. It's like having a telephone, though, in a town where there aren't any other telephones. Like, what's the point if you're not interacting with the rest of the world with the bot? Like, what's it really getting you? So are we going to get to a state where we've all got our own Jarvis? To borrow from Iron Man? Probably not at that scale in my lifetime, but humans are really bad about predicting anything over 10 years out, and we're really bad about predicting anything under 2 years out. So what happens in 20 years? It's possible.
I would think a year from now, this presentation might be completely different. There's a lot of stuff that's churning in the background that you described there, but it is that time. And Chad, we really appreciate you breaking down the hype for us. Yep. Going beyond the hype, as someone once said. Chad, thanks again. I'd like to thank everybody who joined us tonight, and I guess it's dinner time. So thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for joining us. Please remember to subscribe to SBE 15 New York City.